Hello and welcome to the beta reading classes. Just quickly before we get into all of the fun stuff, I just want to make it known that all the materials shown in this presentation are copyright protected, including the excerpts of beta text that we will get to soon. Okay, so today's aims, we are going to look at what beta reading is from both the perspective of the writer and the reader. We're going to look at how you beta read and the types of feedback that you will be expected to give. I'll be answering some questions that you guys have submitted, and we'll also be doing some sample beta reading. So a little bit about me quickly. I want it to be known that I am not formally qualified in beta reading or editing, and this presentation is based off my personal experiences alone. This experience is quite extensive, as I have beta read over 35 projects this year, and I've also run 3 beta reading teams as the author. That's all you need to know about me, so let's get into things. Okay, so what is beta reading? As a reader, you will receive an early draft of an author's manuscript, and you're expected to thoroughly read it and provide critical feedback in some possible forms that we'll explore later in as much depth as possible. This will be feedback on quite an extensive list of things, and we'll look at all these soon. As a writer, you send your manuscript out to selected readers to receive feedback on your project. This is normally up to 5 readers, but I really would not recommend any more than that during any round of beta reading, but you might like to do multiple rounds depending on where your work is kind of sitting. So you normally think about starting beta reading generally at about the 3rd draft stage. This is after a developmental editor and alpha readers normally, if you are making use of those sources of feedback. So the forms of feedback that you might be expected to provide as a reader will most commonly be in-text comments, which will be if the document is an online shared document where the author also has access to the same document, and sometimes you'll be all in the same group. All of the beta readers have the same document. Sometimes you'll just have it individually. So providing in-text comments is usually the main feedback that you'll give, so go crazy with it, add as much as you like. There are a few ways that you can do these comments. This includes highlighting particular sentences, and when I say highlighting, I don't mean like changing the color of it, but like selecting it through highlighting, and then you'll have the option to add in a comment. So you can do this for particular sentences or paragraphs to talk about particular things in those, or you can just add one broadly at the end of the chapter or the text to write broadly about what happened in it. Another way you might provide feedback is through a separate document summary. So sometimes you're only required to write your thoughts in a separate document, but I would not recommend doing this if you are the writer, because it can really limit the feedback depth that you get. If you are the reader, I would consider things like providing a chapter by chapter overview, where you'll just write what chapter it is and then quick thoughts. 1 to 3 sentences generally is enough about the chapter. And then also at the end of that, just provide a summary of the whole text. But again, I don't really think this is sufficient feedback if you are the writer, so look into the other forms of feedback. Now, the final most common form of feedback is a post-reading survey. This is very commonly paired with comments, and personally, comments and surveys is what I like to do. Surveys are generally also called questionnaires. These will generally be about 10 focused questions of things the author is particularly concerned with, or broader questions looking at the text as a whole. Sometimes this might be asking things about the characters and whether they felt authentic to you. It might be things like providing like similar text and comparable titles and things like that. So it's quite a mix, but It will just be like a Google form or something similar to this, and you can just write a few quick sentences on it. Again, paired with the comments, which is where you'll provide most of the feedback, so it's just more general broad things or particular concerns. So there are two main types of feedback that you'll be expected to give as a beta reader. This is critical feedback and reactions. So critical feedback is the most important. This is where you be specific about things you like and you don't like and why. The why is very important so the author can know how to actually improve it. We'll look at in the next slide some aspects that you might focus on to provide this critical feedback on. These might be broad, which are ideas of the whole book, or they might be specific, which can be as small as like sentence or even word details. Sometimes you'll get feedback which is like, I don't think this word fits here. And, like depth like that is what you'll be expected to provide. We have some examples there, like this sentence is awkward to read due to how many ideas are within it. Now, the other type of feedback you might give is reactions. So this is just like how you reacted to the book. It's the reader part of the beta reading. So this is really fun for the author to see. So even though it is less important than the critical one, because the critical one is the feedback that they will actually use, this will really help them see how the book is consumed by the readers, which is a big part of your role as a beta reader. And it also really importantly helps making swallowing the critical feedback easier for the author when it is interspersed with comments like that you really enjoyed a particular section. But you really want to make sure that your comments aren't just this though. These can be used as starting points to the critical feedback, as you might then discuss if the plot twist really surprised you and work on it like that, which I highly recommend. Okay, so let's have a look at some aspects that you might give feedback on. So you have scene transitions, the pacing, gaps and plot holes, unnecessary scenes. This will help with pacing. Writing style can be a hard one, but it is really important to see whether you, as a recommended reader and an intended reader for the book, think that the writing style matches like the genre and things like that, and if it portrays the characters well. Then you'll look at character development, the authenticity of characters, authenticity of their relationships, if their relationships feel natural. This is particularly important in romance books, and we'll have a look at this in some more detail coming up. We'll also look at uniqueness, so uniqueness of characters, uniqueness of the plot, and things like that. Tension levels is another underrated one, which relates to pacing a lot of the times about whether things move too fast, too slow, things could be dramatized, particularly looking in those final about 50 pages of a book, just making sure that the author really feels on the edge of their seats. Dialogue, whether the dialogue is natural and sounds like it's coming from people and not just, someone sitting there and writing out something. Descriptions, is there enough? Is there not enough? Is there too much? Settings, that goes with descriptions. Do you get a clear sense of where they are? Suitability to genre. This is another underrated one. I have come across a few books which I have suggested that I don't think they are marketed in the correct genre, particularly romances. But that's just something to keep in mind. And suitability to genre not just means like how much the plot suits the genre it's marketed, but also how much things like the writing style suit the genre. And inconsistencies, these might be overall big things in the plot, or they might be as simple as a detail about the character, like if their eyes change colour, which I have done quite a few times in my books, so thanks to the beta readers for pointing that out. Okay, so these are just some starting points to ask yourself about plot. There is so many more dimensions than I could cover, but again, a starting point. So do the scene transitions feel natural? Do you feel like we have missed something and a scene should be added? Sometimes you can make suggestions on what you think could fit, Sometimes you can just leave it that you think something needs. It just depends on whether you have ideas for it. Okay, and then we have whether the pacing is too slow and what could be cut. This might just be a sentence or paragraph, or it could be whole scenes. And are we given enough background information, particularly for fantasy novels? Whether we understand the world building, that it makes sense to the plot. Okay, so some questions about characters that are again a starting point for thinking about them and relationships. So, do the relationships between characters feel forced? This is particularly true in romance. Often you'll find because the authors are so used to their characters and know that they get together, they kind of jump into them like getting along, and we don't actually see some of those earlier stages in the relationship. Are the characters consistent? This relates to their physical descriptions, but also just in their behaviours. Do we get a good sense of the characters as individuals? This one is really, really important. And do the characters develop throughout the story? This one is quite interesting, as often you will think that characters develop much more than the author sees them as developing. So it can be particularly helpful to point out how you think they have developed so the author can say that this does actually happen. Are the motivations for actions clear when characters do it? And particularly in fantasy and romance. This one I find, again, authors are often quick to overlook this as they understand their characters so well that they don't provide the reasoning that others need to understand why a character did something. Do all the characters feel necessary, or do you confuse them? This happens if there are way too many characters, and you can suggest that some be combined or cut. And are the characters unique? Okay, so now looking at some of the questions you guys have asked. So how long do beta reads take? If you are an author planning on running a beta team, I would suggest between 2 weeks and 1 month. If your book is above 100,000 words, you might consider doing more, but I would be careful in readers losing interest then if it goes on for too long. But yes, definitely no less than 2 weeks. Even if your book is only like a novella, 2 weeks is the standard to at least give. Should you point out editing things as a beta? This is very context dependent. Often you really want to, if you are going to point out editing things, and this is when you're talking about a lot of editing things. If it's just 1 or 2 typos, for sure, just go and do that. But if it's like constantly, pretty much every sentence you're doing stuff, I would consider whether it is something the author actually depends on you. Sometimes you'll have authors that say that they don't expect you to do it, and normally people won't say anything, so then you're quite unsure. I would think about things like, does the author seem like someone who would be able to pay for an editor? Has the author already employed an editor? And you might want to suggest that perhaps they need to look into getting another one if the quality wasn't there. If you are deciding to do this though, definitely like say and convey that you are not trained, unless you have degrees, and say it is just your opinion. There have been a few instances when I've been working with younger writers that I have become the primary editor, just because I know they will not be able to afford those. And if you're in a situation like that, definitely provide help if you can. But if you don't know things, just say from the perspective of a beta reader that it reads funny and why. But you don't have to get all technical into how they might fix it. So I think tying into the next question then, between an editor and a beta reader, mostly it focuses on the difference between a developmental editor who does look at the same things, but an editor is much more involved in showing how to fix things, whereas a beta reader just kind of points it out, often because they are only readers and they don't have the technical skills of developmental editors. So developmental editors have more of that knowledge of technical aspects Again, beta reader, you're looking from the perspective of a reader, so you'll often overlook the really technical things. So also, what is the difference between an ARC reader? An ARC reader, you don't provide feedback directly to the author. It is only in a review. You get pretty much a finalized manuscript. There might be like one more round of editing, slight editing, normally only just proofreading between when you get it, and you don't provide feedback. You don't provide comments or anything to the author if you're an ARC reader. You might sometimes point out typos, but generally you are not expected to do this, and this is just an additional thing. So I hope that clears up the differences. Beta readers don't focus on as technical, but provide feedback still, if that makes sense. Okay, so how can you make beta reading a paying job? Now, I haven't personally done this, so I can only say from what I have researched and what I've talked to others about. But making beta reading a paying job, before you even start looking at that, you want to build up your experience. Even with having done 35 beta reads this year, I would only now be thinking about having enough experience to be able to ask for payment for these services. If you are looking to, you can either look at freelancing sites like Fiverr or something, but they do charge quite a lot of third-party cost. So you might just look at doing this on your social media, advertising it, but be very clear about when you are offering a paid service. But yeah, there are options to make it paying, but again, really build up that experience first. Okay, now we're going to have a go at sample beta reading. So before you start reading this excerpt, this is the opening of a novel that I have sourced. So we're going to think particularly about how it sets the story up. I was just going to make you read it, but I'm afraid that my little picture might get in the way, so I'll just read this out for you. Otherwise, you can pause it and think about these things. So, the humid wind blows the dusty yellow sand into the eyes and mouths of anybody within its reach, no matter how hard they try to shut them to keep it out. Kyra lets out a cough, feeling the grit sticking between her teeth as she is battered by the relentless force of the desert winds. She should be used to it by now. It has been years living here, with nothing but the thin cloth erected as tents to keep them protected from the elements. Okay, so some things that you might comment on to be fixed include how most of the sentences are quite long, with many ideas in it, and you might suggest that it might be best to split some up. Generally, I like to keep about one or two key ideas in a sentence, as that is all that the reader is going to take forward. Any more details are likely going to be lost. So particularly take care of this if this is an important part of the text, like the beginning here. Also, you might comment on how the second sentence again brings up the wind, and that this is slightly awkward to be repetitive, as we already know it, and there could be a better use of the space here in adding something new to the scene and to the descriptions. Now, there are some things that you can also comment on that are good. So already, immediately starting off this novel, there is a strong scene setting, and we are subtly allowed insight into context and into the character, so how long Kyra has been there. And we already begin to sympathise with her and have them situated in the story, which is really quite remarkable to have been done so early on into the story. So definitely something to point out there. And you might notice a few other things, but those are just some ideas. So now I'm going to give you a go of beta reading with this other excerpt. So this is from the same story as the previous excerpt, so you might like to think about things about whether the voice is consistent and some things like that. So you might like to pause this video and just make some comments on the following passage of text. Okay, so if you would like feedback on your feedback about this text, you can send me a DM on Instagram or email me, and I would love to do that. Otherwise, you can just keep it private and use it as a little practice. Okay, let's move on. So wording your responses. It can be hard to navigate things like how you provide critique without being too mean, or how you word your responses when you're not quite sure what is wrong. Now, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this, as it really is context dependent. But if you don't know what to say, because you don't know what is precisely wrong, acknowledge in your comment that it might just be that you misunderstood something, or that it just wasn't right to you personally. Often a lot of cultural things will be misunderstood, so especially if you're from a different country or language background, anything like that, to the author just really point out it could just be you misunderstanding, but still point it out. That is so important to still point it out, because it's better to point something out and it not be a problem than it to have been a problem and something that many would misunderstand and the author not be aware of it. Now, sometimes you don't have to be specific. Something just like this could be worded better is sufficient. And you might like to do some research to try and understand why something isn't reading right. Doing things like this has allowed me to understand why some sentences read funny, and this led me to understanding things like fragmented sentences. And this has allowed me to provide better feedback on why sentences read wrong, so the author knows how to correct these. And just say that you can't explain something, but that it just doesn't seem right or consistent. There's nothing wrong in just being like, you don't know why. Again, better to just point it out. And now this is a tricky topic about how to provide critique without being mean. So you really want to avoid general comments on the writer's ability. Don't say things like your writing sucks. Now, of course, that's an extreme example of it, but I do see it a bit where other readers have said things that are more about the writer's ability than the product that we are looking at, the project. Try something like the way that this dialogue flows just makes the book hard to engage with, or the way that this and this does this. So really say the impact it has on the book. Again, be specific about what it is in the book that does it, so the author can correct that and it's not about their ability. If the book is particularly challenging and you're really struggling with the quality of it, of the writing, really put more effort into leaving positive comments on what is done right, as this can really help the author know, have a model of what is good and try and bring the rest of their writing up to that level. You might like to try stuff like a feedback sandwich, where you give a positive comment, some negative, some critique is not necessarily negative, and then another positive note. Avoid saying something is bad without explaining it. This again ties into avoiding general comments. Focus on explaining the impacts. Is it harder to engage with? Difficult to follow? Confusing? And also another thing to just keep in mind is who the writer is. If they are younger or newer, they might take feedback harder. And you might really want to tone down your things, give more advice, be more encouraging. Sometimes you might even consider not commenting as much as you normally would if there is so much critique. In some instances like that, it can be better to be a little bit general, just in the sense of, your dialogue doesn't quite feel natural. It just feels a little constructed, and then you don't have to repeat that every single time you see that problem, because quantity can definitely make a difference there. So hopefully that helps you with navigating those situations, but again, really look at the context and really see how that might influence these things. Generally, authors are really good at accepting the critique. If you are the writer, just think about it improving your work. It is not a critique on you. It is just trying to help you improve the work so other readers can enjoy it to the full potential. I really like saying that a lot in my feedback, that it has a lot of potential, and that you just really want to help them reach that because you can see the potential in it. So finally, we're just going to briefly look at finding readers. So as the reader, the most common way is by Instagram post from those you follow or by searching hashtags that are related to it. Always check bios for sign-up links, and author PR accounts will usually have a few links to beta reads for authors they promote if you don't have that many writer friends. As a writer, PR accounts can be helpful, but I would really be careful as I've seen many putting in illegal contracts that force betas to have to finish and similar things like that, which in many countries is not legal. So I'd just really be cautious of that. You cannot force volunteers to finish things. If you're wanting to run it by yourself, create a Google form for signups and advertise on social media. Again, you might like to search freelance sites like Fiverr for paid ones. Now, again, I'd be cautious here as I have heard from many authors that they are usually worse than freebieters from social media. I don't think I've ever heard an author say to me that they really liked one they paid for. I've only heard complaints, but I know I've never paid for one just as I've had so much interest in my books that I haven't felt the need to. You might like to look into this more if your beta readers who apply to your team are only readers and not really writers, because writers bring unique experience that is really helpful. And a final way as a writer that you might find beta readers is by checking other people's social media accounts and their bios and reaching out to them if they say they are beta readers, but I would be cautious talking about prices and whether they do it for free or not. Like, for example, I have in my bio that I beta read, and you can always reach out to me and see if I have availability to take on some projects. So I hope that helps you in finding your betas. So thank you for attending this class. It's been a pleasure getting to spend this time with you. If you have any feedback or would like to express interest for another class and have you saying what this will look like and include, I am thinking about running some courses on alpha reading and ARC reading, so if you're interested or just want to provide general feedback, anything like that on the course, there is this link. I will send it out to you in the email with this recording, or you can just search up that link. But yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of this class. And I hope that we have many chances in the future to be able to continue working on what we've started developing here. Thank you.